So I initially got interested in just agriculture in general when I was going to my undergrad school university in Alabama, Tuskegee University. And I was in the food science program. We were doing a lot, focusing a lot on the like food product and like people as kind of like just consumers for the most part. And then like I kind of just started to think about like the other side of the food system and like social justice and how that all ties in. And so luckily, since I was at like a historically black college that was kind of in a rural area, I was able to connect with Black farmers and, you know, Black community gardeners and stuff like that. And like working with them, I was able to kind of see how agriculture can like bring communities together and can like allow, you know, lower income Black communities to have some type of sovereignty over their food system. So I've always been like really interested in food and food in general, and just want to learn more about that system. And so that made me kind of want to go to the food science route. But I also wanted to go to Tuskegee. So I remember looking on their website to see like what food things do they have or what interesting like food related majors or anything. And they had like a pretty small like food science program. And so I got really involved in that. I was in like all the groups and the clubs for food science. And, you know, like I said before, then I started to kind of like veer off a little to get more into like agricultural side of it. Um, and I did learn a lot in the food science program about the food industry. And I think it helped me moving into the more like social justice side of food because I knew what I didn't like about the food industry and like the big agriculture and stuff. Um, but then I went on to graduate school in Pittsburgh. And so there I was able to really, I think that was the first time I worked at like in the urban like agriculture setting that was like for sure in a city because the community that my other university was in was like pretty rural still, so it was community gardens but not quite like urban ag. um, and so that was the first time I really got to see like things actually play out and thinking about like acquiring land and acquiring funds and things like that and trying to grow in a place where the soil might not be good for growing things. And so just learning more about urban agriculture there. And then I graduated and came back to Chicago. And that's when I started to just look at different organizations. I mean, trying to get employed, trying to get employed, but also trying to be like socially responsible and trying to do socially responsible positions, which was hard. And I ended up connecting with Erica Allen, who is of Urban Growers Collective, which was formerly Growing Power, with Will Allen, and we talked and connected, and she like presented this opportunity to be like the youth program coordinator for their community garden and urban gardening programs for youth. And so that's where I've been since February. I started not that long ago, but it has been really nice connecting and seeing all the different locations that they have because they've really been doing it for a while now. As it is in the title, it's just basically, you know, growing food and like cultivating food in what is considered an urban environment. So within cities, usually on like vacant lots or just like patches of land that aren't being used generally in the city. And typically the food that's grown there is distributed to the consumers or like community members um, that are like in the surrounding area of the urban farm. I feel like people have different definitions of exactly what urban agriculture is. Some people are in it more to like just provide to like restaurants and kind of like it's kind of more hip, and then like other people are kind of more like community garden, community urban agriculture, where they like you know provide opportunities and workshops and things like that for the outside community or the neighborhood community. And they're a lot more involved in the process of growing food and you know distributing food and things like that. So I think it's a definition that varies, but generally it's growing food in cities and urban areas. I think well to go way back, I guess it started initially with like World War I and World War II, when you know the government was really like pushing for people to have their own gardens, called victory gardens or war gardens, to get people to have like morale about you know the war and the war efforts, but also to you know supplement for their food, you know, supply and food rations. And so you know, a ton of people had community gardens or their own home gardens in urban areas. at a certain point, it was like surpassing the amount of food that was being grown in rural areas at the time. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's very
people
cool.
were really for it. Yeah, but then after that, after the wars like were over, it kind of like just dropped off kind of completely for a while, because the city started to kind of change and the landscape of cities started to change, and then suburbs became a thing and people started to move out to the suburbs, and so it kind of dropped off. But then it came back again in the 1970s, where it was kind of more focused at that point on like social justice and environmental sustainability. And we're kind of getting to the 80s, which is like the organic agriculture movement and things like that. So that's kind of like the 70s, and going forward is kind of like the framework for what urban agriculture is today. I feel like in the 90s, they started to kind of like, US cities started kind of adopt the idea of urban farms being like a solution for solving like food insecurity in cities. I mean, I think it's definitely important for people to understand the roots, I guess, starting from like the 70s on of urban agriculture, because a lot of times, I don't know, not a lot of times, but there are, times when people, since it is so trendy, that people will go into communities and might buy up like cheap land, and just kind of grow things there to kind of just be trendy, or send it off to like higher end chefs or something like that, versus actually being engaged with the community. And that's why sometimes the distinction between like urban ag and like community farming and community gardening, because I feel like a lot of times there are people that are in these communities that don't actually engage and work towards increasing food access and food security and things like that. So I think remembering the roots of urban agriculture being rooted in social justice and like environmental sustainability and food um, security is like good. So. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest part would be kind of like I touched on earlier, is the sovereignty part, like having the ability to have control over something, especially in times where people, the government was in control of a lot of things going on in people's communities, and still are a lot of low-income communities. So having something that you feel like you can have ownership over, and something that you feel like you can control, and you can like somewhat have some control over your life. When you feel like you don't have a whole lot of control, especially if you live in neighborhoods where you don't have access to, food and grocery stores, instead of, having to always reach out to like a higher, office or something to try to get things done, you can try to do things yourself. So I think the sovereignty part of it is big. So going along those same lines, I think just like thinking about how that can also affect, communities that don't have access to, healthy restaurants, and communities that are food deserts, things like that, and being able to incorporate health and wellness into agriculture. And then also kind of like healing, especially for, African Americans, healing that connection between um, slavery and like farming and rural life, and kind of trying to healing those wounds around like farming being something that isn't done by Black people, that isn't connected to slavery. So kind of letting people know that farming does not equal slavery, and I think it's becoming more prevalent now, especially in urban areas, that that's not the case. And I think community gardens and urban farming is like kind of healing those wounds. So food desert is basically a community, typically a low income, usually minority community, that doesn't have access to fresh, healthy uh, foods. So there usually is no grocery store there that sells any fresh produce or fresh food. Typically, it's like mainly the landscape for food in that community is just like fast food for the most part. So some people have argued that we shouldn't use the term food desert anymore, so that we should refer to it as like food apartheid, because food desert is like insinuating that it's something that's just naturally occurring versus something that's, you know, versus something that's like actually put into place to kind of like negatively affect these communities. I think I think I kind of already said it earlier, thinking about like the history of it. I think it's important for people, consumers, and for people that are doing urban farming to understand the roots and how it's important to have, if you're going to be in communities growing food, to had to have a community aspect and to kind of work towards creating a food system that's actually fair and just for the community that you're working in, you're growing in. So yeah, I think that would be the main thing I want people to know is the roots of it, and that it's not just a trendy thing, even though it can be, I get it, but it's like it can also be in many ways very helpful for communities that are struggling with like food insecurity. I think it's a misconception that urban agriculture alone can feed like cities, because like the amount of space that you would need to in order to feed the city along with urban agriculture would be just too much. It is not feasible. But I mean, I do recognize that urban agriculture is very important for like providing fresh produce to like the communities surrounding the garden, and it still does a lot with like providing education as basis for growing for some community members. But I think it's also important to grow the relationships with, rural like producers of color, and um, creating that connection. And just one example I'm thinking of is like the organization I work with now. We have like a mobile market that goes around and provides produce to people. And so we use stuff from the farm that we grow on, but we also get stuff wholesale. And because we can't provide and grow everything ourselves, so being able to have a connection with a larger grower can like allow us to be like the distribution channel for these different things and provide our produce too, and have a hub for the people that want to like contact us in the community, but also like have a connection with a larger producer that can help feed people, because that's what we want to do kind of at the end of the day. Yeah. So I think for like, I think for community gardeners, I feel like community gardens and urban farms, I think it's gonna get harder as the virus continues to spread and gets bigger before it gets smaller. I think it's going to be difficult to try to keep the farm like workers safe and keep the community members safe. You're going to have to like definitely have set guidelines for dealing with it, especially in like urban areas where everyone's so densely packed in. So yeah, so I think that's going to have like a negative effect, I think, on the community members that do um, depend on this produce that they get usually weekly. Um, but there are like organizations and people that are like fighting for like farmers markets to be considered essential, just like grocery stores are. So this counts like towards like also community gardens and for urban farms that have produce and might have markets at their own garden, to be able to also allow community members to still come there. And then one thing that our organization is doing is that we're allowing people to come in and pick up produce in like a scheduled way, so that they don't have to interact with anybody, they don't have to touch anybody, but they can still come and like get their produce and leave. So I feel like it will get harder, but I think if we like plan ahead as far as like urban agriculture during this time, it can still work out for communities. And also you also have to consider like the amount of space that you might have. So I think it would be harder for community gardens. That might just be like a small like plot versus urban agriculture space that might be a little bit bigger, have a little bit more room for everybody to spread out, and people can still come in and work, and more people can still produce food for the community. So but I do think it's good that people are starting to grow their own food, in that and starting to get familiar with the process now, so that when this does pass, then maybe they can start helping with other community gardens and kind of spread the word about how important community gardening is, especially in times like this, when you might not have access to food. And you might have had access to food before, but now you kind of step in the shoes of communities that might not have access to fresh produce now. So I think it's raising awareness kind of about issues surrounding food and food access, and getting people involved. So I think it's good that people are starting to grow their own stuff. It's not related to agriculture, so I guess it's not on brand. But I think my favorite, I was thinking about this. I think my favorite food memory is probably the first time I had Thai food, because like I never experienced anything like it before. I remember sitting down I mean, the atmosphere was lovely. It was dark. It was cute. And then they like brought out this. I got masa man curry, and they like brought it out, and it smelled. I think I never like smelled something like that before. It was like I couldn't like before I even dug in and burned my mouth up. I was like, I was like, this smells like flowers. Like it smelled like so aromatic, and I was like, this is so great. And it just like kind of like got my like, wheels turning about like how creative you could possibly be like with food and thinking about different cultures and stuff, and just kind of like expanded my horizons thinking about food and kind of like the culinary side of food. I think it's food is just representative of us as humans, right? I
Right.
mean, in so many ways, it's the way we farm food, how farming started, how we choose to create foods based on where we are geographically, you know, what food means to different cultures.